Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with here today with an article of something that is an interest to me. But I am out of town right now, as I said on probably at the time you're listening to this, the last few videos. So without me being able to take my stuff with me, which was a choice, I could have, but I just am not. I figured during the time that I'm out of town, it'll be just some fun or stupid things to bring up, just things that are not current event sort of things, because obviously without me bringing my stuff, I'm not able to keep up on what is actually happening. I'll be able to read about stuff, but not put out videos on things. So what I figured I would do on this particular video, because again, it is an interest to me, is talk about comic books, which is an interest of mine, or I shouldn't say it's an interest, slash hobby sort of thing. It's been something I've been interested in for since probably the fall of '96 when I was 18 years old and went away to college. That's what started getting me into them. So I figured, what the heck? Let's do a top 10 list because everybody likes lists, right? So we'll do the top 10 comic books ever ranked. This is by ScreenRant. This is from September 16th of 2023. I'm not a huge fan of ScreenRant. They tend to be shills for everything, but I figured, what the heck? This list actually isn't that bad, though I don't necessarily agree with it. We'll see on here. I did go through it, and I already don't remember what was on there, what was on the list overall, but I'll let you know if I've read something or if I would let your what's it called, recommend it to you. God, I'm lost for words already. So let us just jump right into it here. And we're going to skip over the subheadline and just kind of go right into it. We already see number 10 down there. But it says, naming the best comic books of all time is no easy task, with each new decade delivering an instant classic from Marvel, DC Comics, Image, Dark Horse, and many more. But a handful of famous comic books and graphic novels stand out above all the rest. The medium has been growing exponentially since its early days in the 20th century. This has gradually evolving mainstream culture and artistic approaches changed how comics and their characters are written, with each passing decade seeing more great comic stories published. DC and Marvel have unsurprisingly created some of the most famous comics ever, but the likes of Dark Horse and Image spawned some gems as well. And seeing our ranking of the most iconic, acclaimed, and important comic books of all time, one publisher dominates the list. So we will go through that. So it looks like it's starting with Sin City here, which is by Frank Miller. And let's read the blurb before I give my thoughts on it. It says, his work with Batman and Daredevil is typically first to come to mind as writer and artist Frank Miller's best comics, but he's also written some classic non-superhero stories. One of the genre's best black and white comics, Dark Horse's Sin City, is an acclaimed neo-noir story set in a bleak, authoritarian-run town in the United States. The comic was revered for its approach and heavy inspiration from pulp and crime noir, TV, movie, and magazine stories. Likewise, it presented an engrossing change of pace by Miller, writing Sin City more like a serialized TV/movie crime drama in a comic book format. Though the second movie adaptation was poorly received, the initial 2005 movie received generally positive reviews. All right. So, yes, I've read Sin City. In fact, I read it for the first time a few years ago. Now, the reason it took me so long to read this is because I'm not really a big fan of Frank Miller. Um, I read his Batman Year One, which is actually really good. I have not read his Daredevil stuff, though I own it, and I keep forgetting that I even have it, and I've had it for years. Like the Daredevil Visionaries volumes that he did, there's three of them that cover all his issues. And again, I haven't read them, but I probably will at some point go back and read them. But so Frank Miller is kind of like for me, I guess. But like I said, I got the whole set of Sin City on eBay, like maybe I think it was might have been pre-COVID, like just about pre-COVID, but somewhere in that area in the last few years. And I read it, and it is fantastic. Like it's legit great. So I would absolutely recommend Sin City to you. And again, it's a neo-noir thing. It's not superheroes or, kiddie things like what people think comics are. This is an adult thing. And like it says here, the first movie is pretty much spot on with the way the comic book is. And don't watch the second movie. The second movie is kind of shit. So on to the next one, Preacher. And I'm just going to start this by saying Preacher is my all-time favorite comic book series. I haven't read it in years, but there was a time where I reread it like every 6 months. It's that good. Ignore the TV show because the TV show is dog shit. The first season kind of keeps in line with the comics, but other than that, it just completely deviates from the comic as a whole. And yeah, I wouldn't even bother with the TV show. Again, it's dog shit. So Preacher, it says here, is one of the comic book industry's big two publishers. DC Comics is primarily known for its superheroes, However, their Vertigo imprint of comics spawned some timeless non-superhero classics. Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon's Preacher, Steve Dillon, rest in peace, was one such cult hit, with the story centered around a grim supernatural/religious disaster plaguing a small Texas town. That's not quite true, but let's see what the next sentence says. There's Jesse Custer, who is the dude in the picture here, the titular preacher, becomes possessed by a supernatural entity comprised of pure goodness and pure evil, possibly becoming the most powerful entity in the universe. The story takes its small scope and eventually branches out across the country, meeting a bizarre cast of characters. Anything further on that? Okay, I didn't think so. So, all right, yeah. So that's it's not the greatest summary of it, but of the story, but it's a it's not a limited series. Whereas like Sin City is kind of like a bunch of mini series and one shots covered across 7 volumes. The Preacher stories you could find. I'm looking at my bookshelves right now because they're on there. I have 6 volumes of Preacher stories, which covers everything. Same like the Sin City, when I said the 7 volumes cover everything. And with Preacher, like I said, those 6 books, highest possible recommendation. And just to give you an idea on this, there's 2 people that I've had in my life that were right around the same time that were both comic book fans. You find out someone else is a comic book fan that you're talking to. It's like, oh my God, it's like heavy metal people, the same thing where it's like, oh my God, you listen to that too. And then suddenly it's like, did we just become best friends? So I remember both these people, I gave them the first book and I said, just read this one. And if you like it, I guarantee you're going to come back to me and ask for the rest of the books to read. Okay. And both of these people, that was exactly what happened. They read the first book in one sitting and came back to me and were like, I need you to give me all the other books. And so they did, and they were just like, that was incredible. But just an FYI for anybody, this one is about as hard R as humanly possible. Language, the violence, there's really not much nudity in there, but this thing goes hard. There's a reason why people were not at were not it was not being adapted to TV, was because nobody thought it could be done. And if it was going to be done, though, it would have to be on like HBO or cable. And it was eventually put on, I think it was AMC, and it was just so watered down. But again, also it kind of went woke, which for this series should not be doing that. But anyway, highest possible recommendation here. But again, if you're listening to this and you decide you want to read it, just an FYI that it's not for children at all. So then we have Batman: The Long Halloween. Says The Dark Knight has amassed an impressive catalog of some of the medium's best comics, and Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's The Long Halloween frequently ranks among the most accomplished and influential, let alone best comics. It is one of the best Batman comics to influence the Dark Knight trilogy, proving to be one of the best examples of the superhero's best traits. The story arc is anchored by a detective thriller premise, highlighting an element of Batman that often goes criminally forgotten in live action. It does so while still embracing the noir hero's dark mythical atmosphere and imposing physical prowess. The Long Halloween is an engrossing crime saga that reminds fans how masterfully grounded street-level stories can be done. And while this wouldn't be on my personal like top 5, maybe even top 10, it is an excellent story. Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale have done numerous projects together, and there's even a sequel series to this called Dark Victory that I would recommend reading as well. It's probably like half a step down on the greatness scale from this one, though it's again very highly recommended. But this takes place really at like the beginning of when Batman came to being. Like it's a very young Batman, and it's like right when all the freaks, as they call them, were taken over from like the mobsters in Gotham City. So again, a very high recommendation on this one as well. If you want to read a contained Batman story that's not a part of like the actual ongoing Batman series that's been going on since the late 30s. This is a 12 issue miniseries, and Dark Victory, the sequel, is I want to say 13 issues. So again, very high recommendation on both of those series. So let's go on to number 7, Kingdom Come. Says expanding to the greater Justice League, Kingdom Come is a landmark comic in DC's pantheon of stories. This alternate canon comic was a sort of meta deconstruction of superheroes as a concept. Veteran writer Mark Waid and iconic artist Alex Ross put together a miniseries that detail the fall and prominence of the outdated traditional heroes and the rise of dangerous copycats. And they're more like anti-heroes, really. As the traditional superheroes fall out of touch with the changing times and new threats, with Batman's team trying to stop Lex Luthor and the impending conflict. conflict. It's a fascinating alternate tale that stands as one of the famous Elseworlds imprint's best comics. And Elseworlds, I'm not even sure if the Elseworlds brand is still around. I think it might be, but Elseworlds was DC Comics thing that was like, hey, take a character and like tell a story about them that doesn't take place in normal continuity, sort of thing, with like a kind of a different concept. And the art here by Alex Ross is ridiculous. It is phenomenal, and it's painted, as you can see. This is what the whole story looks like, is stuff like this. And it is on my shelf as well. In fact, everything that we've read so far is on my shelf. And when I say on my shelf, like I have boxes of trade paperbacks. On my shelf is like the best stuff that I've read, or just my favorite things. This is on there too. So I again highly recommend Kingdom Come if you want to see just kind of a slightly different take on some of the characters that you're used to knowing, but again, how they would deal with also the newer threats of like these newer superheroes who really it's kind of more or less like they don't have problems killing villains. So definitely a recommendation there. So V for Vendetta. So we finally get the one that I have not read. Um, and I'm gonna probably take a kick in the groin for this, but I do own it. It is in the boxes in my closet. It used to be on my shelf because I just figured what the heck it should be on my shelf, but I never got around to reading it. I will at one point. I don't know when that is. And thank you, this ad, for popping up and not wanting to be closed. So for V for Vendetta, says Alan Moore is known for his work with a few of DC's superheroes, but V for Vendetta was another DC Vertigo comic that went in an excitingly different direction. It's a dark political dystopia story where a fictional political party has successfully converted the United Kingdom into a gruesome neo-fascist police state. The main character is the titular V, sporting the classic Guy Fawkes mask, leading an anarchistic revolution against the ruling oppressors. Given the intense premise, V for Vendetta tackles a variety of heavy political themes in a dense, elaborate story full of moral grays and extremes. As you probably are aware, there is a movie, V for Vendetta, and like I said, I haven't read the comics, so I can't compare the two. But I would definitely recommend the movie. And like I said, since I haven't read the comic, I can't really recommend it because I haven't read it. But it's Alan Moore and like his heyday, so it's probably worth your time. Um, let's move on to Batman: The Killing Joke, which is on my shelf. We're going to have another Alan Moore comic here. So it says as far as Batman goes, Moore and artist Brian Bolland, who is phenomenal. Like this is just this scrapes the bottom of what Brian Bolland can do. He's great. So it's created another one of the Cape Crusaders' best and most influential comics. Though The Killing Joke was a 46-page one-shot rather than fleshed out series. Yeah, so it is just one contained story, like basically one book. The story told is impressively done. Like with The Long Halloween, The Killing Joke was instrumental as reference material for the Dark Knight trilogy, namely in inspiring Heath Ledger's immortalized take on the Joker. One of the best comics the villain has featured in, and it highlights how the Clown Prince of Crime's excuse for embracing madness is nothing more than a thinly veiling his cowardice that only Batman has called out. Whenever a major action adaptation aims to bring the Joker, the Killing Joke is the best source material for understanding why he's such a compelling supervillain. Yeah, and again, highly recommended this. I've only read it one time, and again, it is on my shelf. I have meant to go back and read it. I've got other stuff in front of me right now, so I will at some point go back and read it, but I would certainly recommend it because I remember reading it the first time and I was just like, oh, that's what everybody was talking about. This is actually really, really good. So definite recommendation there. And these little eyes at the bottom are just annoying me. So we are on to number 4, which is Batman Year One, which I did mention briefly in Sin City Above because it's a Frank Miller thing. It says origin stories can occasionally feel like a dime a dozen. God damn it with these ads. What the absolute crap. Go away. So origin stories can occasionally feel like a dime a dozen, have understandably worn out fans' patience over the years. However, Miller and David Mazzucchelli's Year One is among the most definitive comic book origins. The late Dennis O'Neil started Batman's exceptional noir reinvention, and Year One was one of the comics that brought this evolution to a crescendo. Down to the pulp-inspired artwork, it's a rich and atmospheric crime drama that shows fans how Bruce Wayne came to be Gotham City's watchful protector. Likewise, it served as a great parallel origin story for soon-to-be Commissioner Gordon alongside Batman, depicting the two as flawed characters that are ultimately trying to do the best they can to bring justice to Gotham's systematic corruption. And that is also on my shelf here. So, again, recommendation on this. And I didn't read this until just a couple years ago as well. I think it was during COVID where I started kind of going, what are some all-time comic book stories that I've never read? Like I want to fill in those gaps, and this was one of them. And I didn't realize it was just like part of the actual Batman series. So it's just I think it's like around Batman, was it 4 or 500, one somewhere in there. But it's from like the early to mid 80s, I want to say. But yeah, I definitely would recommend it. It's only a 4 issue arc is all it is. So it shouldn't take that long to read it. So definitely recommend it as well. So number three, The Sandman. Says the most iconic Vertigo series that DC published was its flagship, The Sandman, written by the great Neil Gaiman and illustrated by numerous artists. The story revolves around Dream, who is the character right here, one of the seven Endless, finding himself captured by cultists and forced to acknowledge that even entities that are even stronger than DC's gods, such as them, need to accept inevitable change. The Sandman is celebrated as Gaiman's magnum opus and praised for its ethereal and surreal personifications of metaphysical concepts. The Endless are those personifications as they embody some of those powerful forces that make up the universe. And that's a like possibly the most high level overview you can imagine of this series.
Got
But I would
accomplishments.
and here we go with some
Stay on top.
audio stuff and that it went away. Okay, thank you, ad, for playing. I don't want any audio playing. But anyway, back to the Sandman. This is also on my shelf. There are, as of right now, it's been reprinted every few years, off and on. So there's which came out probably in the last 2 years, I'd say, or last year maybe. From when you're hearing this, it is early November of 2023 at this point. There are some deluxe edition trade paperbacks. The first four trade paperbacks are the entire series that was written that's being talked about here. There's trade paperbacks 5 and 6, which have additional miniseries and one shots that take place after the original DC Vertigo series. Get them all. I think every single one of them is written by Neil Gaiman. So um, high recommendation there. Again, this is another one that I hadn't read till a couple years ago, and I thoroughly enjoyed it as well. Though it's kind of the one that's, of all the ones we've seen so far on this list, it's the one that, as it says here, kind of deals with the most like philosophical concepts as opposed to being like a straight up just comic book with heroes and villains. So again, very much a recommendation. So then we have Batman: The Dark Knight Returns, and we come to Frank Miller again. It says arguably the most popular Elseworlds Batman story is Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. While an unquestionable classic to most, some of its themes have been unfortunately misconstrued and subsequently glorified in the modern day. Despite this, it remains a gripping action and politically dystopian set Batman arc, portraying a more cynical, jaded version of the hero after the fall of most of its heroes. So yeah, this is a future Batman story. Says a 50-plus-year-old Bruce Wayne is compelled back into the Cape and Cowl after Gotham regresses into senseless crime. Let me put that out, and the US government continually neglects the dying city. Meanwhile, the same governing body has effectively turned the once great Superman into a political weapon and lapdog. Yeah, Superman's the villain in this. So that is also on my shelf. I read it a long time ago, and I have it on my shelf just because it is considered one of the greatest comic book stories of all time. That is a legit thing. But I've said a couple of times I'm not like a huge Frank Miller fan, and when I read this, I just kind of like I didn't get the hype, to be honest, but I probably will reread it again sometime in the near future because again, it is considered a all-time great story. It's I think a 3 issue miniseries or 4 issue miniseries. Again, like I said, it's a long time since I've read it, but it's small, so you should be able to get through it pretty quick. But given its status as one of the greatest comic book stories of all time, I would definitely recommend it as well. And we're on to number one, which I kind of figured would be Watchmen. Anyway, I knew that even before I saw this article. So Watchmen, it says perhaps Moore's most iconic works, was Alan Moore again, in comics came in his Watchmen series. Along with artists Dave Gibbons and John Higgins, the series functioned like a dark satirization of the superhero genre by portraying a group of morally ambiguous heroes that are clearly and dangerously unstable in their respective ways. The comic also incorporated, for its time, more contemporary elements like the Vietnam War and the Cold War. Yeah, it came out in like the mid to late 80s. I think it was somewhere between 85 and 87 was when the series came out. This Dr. Manhattan, for instance, can be easily seen as the physical manifestation of paranoia over nuclear war breaking out. And along with the likes of The Sandman and The Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen was one of the few comic books of the time to rank on the New York Times bestseller list. Yeah, and it's been in print continuously in trade paperback form since uh basically it was printed as a trade paperback, so it was decades ago, and I do of course have it on my shelf. I've read it a few times but not in a long time. And very much recommend it. The movie is close to what the comic book is, though there is one massive plot point that is missing from the movie that at least in my opinion, I don't see why they changed it. But and also I should say the performance of Jackie Earle Haley as Rorschach, who is this character right here, is in the movie is phenomenal and pretty much, in my opinion, exactly what Rorschach should have been. And he's the protagonist of the story. But this is. As you see, it was put out by DC, but it doesn't take place in the main DC universe. It's just kind of its own thing. And again, very much recommended. And it is a pretty dense story as well. And Alan, that's kind of what Alan Moore does. So that is the end here. Let me know. I know what you guys think. I've gone on quite long about this and my feelings about each of these things. So it turns out I actually have, except for V for Vendetta, I've read everything on here, which I'm glad to see. But there's definitely so many more things out there that you could read. And if you're listening to this, let me know what other things you'd like to have seen on a top 10 list, or what are your favorite comics that you've ever read. I definitely would like to start that conversation because that's very much an interest to me. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.